Hi everyone, I'm Virat and I'm very happy to present our work, Back to the Drawing Board, a critical analysis of poisoning attacks on production federated learning. So this is a joint work with my advisor Amir at UMass Amherst and my collaborators Peter Kairouz and Daniel Ramage at Google Research. So as we all know, in traditional machine learning, a server or a service provider collects data from a bunch of users and trains a machine learning model in a centralized fashion. But this raises a lot of privacy concerns because the users have to share their data in plain text with a untrusted and potentially malicious server. Also, the server has to bear the entire cost of computation. So federated learning addresses some of these issues to a certain extent by allowing the clients or users to collaborate via a central server uh, and while keeping their data local and therefore private to some extent. Specifically, the server broadcasts a global model to a subset of clients in an FL round. These clients then train the model locally and compute a model update, and then send this model update back to the server. The server then aggregates all of these updates and updates the global model to be used for the following FL rounds. So there are a lot of benefits of federated learning, and consequently it has been adopted by many leading industrial applications such as Google's keyboard, Siri, Alexa, etc. So there are two major flavors of federated learning. One is cross-device FL and one is cross-silo FL. In cross-device FL, the number of clients are very large. It can be anywhere from thousands to billions, and only a very small fraction of the clients participate in each FL round. On the other hand, in cross-silo FL, the number of clients are rather small, maybe in hundreds, but all of them participate in each FL round. So as we can see, federated learning is a distributed system, and therefore, unfortunately, it can have an adversary who compromises some of the clients or owns some of the clients in order to poison the model and reduce the performance of the global model in certain fashion. So these attacks that we call poisoning attacks can have severe consequences ranging from a simple network intrusion detection system misclassifying a malware as a benign software to an autonomous vehicle labeling a stop sign as a go sign, which can lead to accidents and even worse. So consequently, there has been a significant literature dedicated to understanding poisoning attacks on federated learning from both attacks and defenses perspective. There are a lot of attacks which are of various types and have made quite alarming claims about or against the robustness of federated learning. And also there are defenses which try to mitigate these attacks in different threat models, and these defenses have various costs and guarantees. But despite so much work from academia, these leading applications of federated learning don't seem to worry too much about the poisoning attacks, and because they have not implemented any of the defenses from the literature in their FL applications. So in this work, we ask a key question that is poisoning really a threat to production FL? So by production FL, we mean any federated learning algorithm that has been implemented in a practical real-world FL application. So in order to answer this question for the talk, I'll follow this outline. So as I mentioned before, there has been a significant prior work on poisoning, understanding poisoning in FL. So as a first step in our work, we try to systemize the poisoning threat models in federated learning. In particular, we identify three main dimensions of the threat model, which are adversary's objective, adversary's knowledge, and their capability. Adversary's objective can either be targeted poisoning, backdoor poisoning, or untargeted poisoning. And backdoor poisoning can be further divided into semantic or artificial backdoors. In terms of adversary's knowledge of the global model parameters, we identify two types. One is white box access or no box access. In case of the white box access, the adversary has the full knowledge of the model, which includes its parameters, architecture, outputs in all of the FL rounds. On the other hand, in no box knowledge, the adversary knows none of these things for any of the FL rounds. In terms of adversary's knowledge of the benign data that is used to train the FL model, we identify either a full knowledge case or a partial knowledge case. So in case of full knowledge, adversary knows the data or benign data of all the clients in FL, which is kind of impractical, but it has been used previously, or partial knowledge, where adversary knows the benign data only of the compromised clients. Finally, in terms of adversary's ability to access the compromised client devices, we identify two types. One is model poisoning, another is data poisoning. In case of model poisoning, the adversary is smart, technically savvy, and therefore they can break into the device of compromised clients by circumventing the security protocols and access the model parameters and directly manipulate the poisoned model updates. In case of data poisoning, however, the adversary is rather naive, so they cannot break into the device, so only can indirectly manipulate these model updates via data poisoning. So as we can imagine, data poisoning leads to rather naive, less poisonous model updates, but because it is a simple kind of poisoning, the number of compromised clients can be very large. So we have a lot of discussion on the systemization in our main paper, but for conciseness, I'll move on to our next topic, that is takeaways from our systemization. So the first takeaway is about the gap that we observe in the theory and practice of FL poisoning. Again, we observe a lot of gaps and have discussed them in the paper, but due to time constraints, I'll focus on two major issues that we think should be addressed as soon as possible. So the first gap or first issue that we observe is the use of rather impractical threat models in prior works. For example, a common threat model used in both attacks and defenses work is model poisoning attacks on cross-silo federated learning. So why is this an impractical threat model? Because silos are generally very large organizations like banks or hospitals or universities who have their software, security softwares professionally maintained. Therefore, even if an adversary is assumed to be very technically savvy, they cannot just easily break into the devices of these silos that host the global models in order to poison or in order to mount a model poisoning attack. Instead, we believe a more practical threat model would be data poisoning in cross-silo FL, where the adversary compromises some of the users who contribute their data to a silo, so the adversary can manipulate the data of these users and then share it with the silo to compromise it. Another major issue is the use of very large percentages of compromised clients in prior works, anywhere between 5 to 25 percentages. So if we assume in a typical cross-device federated learning application like Google Gboard, which has say 1 billion clients, and if the cost of compromising a client is assumed to be around $10, then just to compromise 5% of the clients, the cost of an attack would be $500 million, which is quite impractical in most of the real-world settings. The second major takeaway from our systemization is that untargeted attacks are, we believe, the most severe threat to production FL. So first of all, untargeted attacks aim to misclassify most or all of the inputs to the global model at test or inference time. So why is this the most severe threat model? So first of all, untargeted poisoning aims to impact all or most of the users in federated learning as compared to targeted or backdoor attacks, and therefore they can harm the experience of the federated learning application for many more users. The second issue or second reason is that untargeted poisoning is quite difficult to detect in practice due to the absence of benchmarks. So what we mean by that is, consider an untargeted attack that reduces the accuracy of the global model by just few percentages. So this can go unnoticed by the server because there are no benchmarks. But this small reduction in accuracy can have arbitrary impact on an arbitrary set of users in federated learning, which again can harm their experience. So therefore, in this work, we primarily focus on untargeted attacks and their evaluation on federated learning under practical threat models, which are guided by our systemization from the first part. But instead of just simply evaluating the existing attacks, we improve the existing attacks or provide improved attacks that I'll talk about now. So the intuition behind our attacks is to find a set of malicious updates in the space of benign updates that maximize the distances between the benign and the malicious aggregates. Now, the space of benign updates is decided by the target aggregation rule or defense that we want to break. Based on this intuition, we provide a general optimization problem in the paper where we compute the benign aggregate using the benign data that the adversary has, for example, in partial or full knowledge case, and then we find a poisoned set of poisoned updates that maximize this distance between poisoned and benign aggregates. So I'll not go into the details of our attacks, but give an intuition again. So in our data poisoning attack, we exploit the fact that server has no visibility into the data on compromised client devices, and in particular, they don't have any visibility into the size of the data. What we observe is the more mislabeled data that we use to compute these poisoned updates, the more poisonous or more impactful these updates become. And in order to circumvent the target aggregation rule or target defense, we just need to adjust the size of mislabeled data. In our model poisoning attacks, we exploit the direct access that adversary has to the model parameters and therefore use gradient ascent to increase the loss of the final model update on some benign data. And then finally, we scale this update in order to circumvent the given aggregation rule or the target defense that we want to break. Now I'll move on to discuss some of the key results of our evaluations of the robustness of federated learning under the more practical threat models, which are again guided by our systemization from the first part. So first, we evaluate non-robust federated learning, non-robust cross-device federated learning with an average aggregation rule. So in production CrossDevice FL with billions of devices, we believe that the percentages, or we argue that the percentages of compromised clients are about less than 0.01 for the model poisoning attacks, while they are less than about 0.1% for the data poisoning attacks. So again, due to time constraints, I'll not discuss why are these numbers should be what they are, but in the paper we have an extensive discussion on this. So we use an attack impact metric which to assess the impact of our attacks, which measures the reduction in the global model's accuracy due to an attack as compared to the benign setting without any adversary. So we observe that with these percentages of compromised clients, even the non-robust federated learning achieves very high accuracies, which is in stark contrast to the prior belief that the non-robust federated learning with average aggregation rule can be broken even by a single compromised client. So we believe that this intrinsic robustness of cross-device FL is because with these small percentages or practical percentages of compromised clients, in most of the FL rounds, only benign clients participate, and therefore they can easily cancel any negative impact that the compromised clients have had on the global model. We make a similar observation for cross-silo federated learning with non-robust average aggregation rule. When we evaluate it using our state-of-the-art data poisoning attacks, in fact, even at a very high percentages of compromised clients, there is absolutely no impact on the accuracy of cross-silo federated learning. So as I discussed before, the model poisoning attacks are not really practical in cross-silo FL. So again, this intrinsic robustness is because of batching, and the benign data that these silos have can easily cancel the negative impact of the poison data on the global model. Next, we evaluate cross-device federated learning with robust aggregation rules. And we observe that none of the attacks, data or model poisoning, have any noticeable impact on the cross-device federated learning with defenses such as norm-bounding or multi-chrome or trimbean, even when the percentages of compromised clients are as high as 1%. Again, the low attack impact is because in most of the FL rounds, only benign clients participate, and now on top of it, we have these defenses which try to mitigate the impact of poisoned updates. Moreover, the robustness of federated learning with robust aggregation rules or defenses persists even when we run federated learning for a very large number of rounds in the presence of adversary. This is very important thing because federated learning is a continuous learning process. It doesn't stop. It keeps learning with new data, new clients as they join in federated learning system. Finally, as I noted before, there are numerous defenses that exist against federated learning poisoning. But very interestingly, what we observe in our evaluations is that the simple and low-cost defenses like bounding the norms of the updates or bounding the local dataset sizes of clients are sufficient to protect federated learning against untargeted poisoning attacks in practice. So this observation questions whether we really need the costly and more difficult to implement defenses in practice to protect federated learning. And if we need them, then we need to be more specific about the threat models that we want them in. So to summarize, in this work, our goal was to investigate whether poisoning attacks are really a threat to production FL. In order to answer this, we first systemized the threat models of federated learning poisoning attacks, and we designed improved model and data poisoning attacks against federated learning. And then we evaluated our improved and existing poisoning attacks on federated learning under practical threat models that are guided by our systemization from the first part. And a couple of key takeaways from my talk are federated learning, we believe, is much more robust to poisoning attacks than believed previously. And the simple and low-cost defenses, such as bounding the norms or bounding the local dataset sizes, are enough in practice to protect federated learning in most of the settings. Thank you. That's all, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions, please step up to the microphone.
So, Isa Khalil, Qatar Computing Research Institute. So my question is, do you assume that the clients are IIDs? What do you have the same insights if you have personalized federated learning setup?
No, we assume that it's a heterogeneous environment. Like the clients are not IID, their data sets are not IID distributed. They're pretty heterogeneous.
But then how do you measure performance? It is the performance at the server or maybe the performance at the end clients? Maybe it's good for one client, but it's bad for the others.
That's a good question. So in this case, we measure the performance of the global model on some held out data because that is how the performance is generally measured on the server side.
Hi, George Osaveri, Northeastern University. Very interesting talk. I have a question. Could you please elaborate a little more on why untargeted attacks are considered more impactful? Because it seems a little counterintuitive that the untargeted version of the attack would be more relevant, right? Because you're reducing the global model accuracy by a little bit for all clients instead of reducing it by a lot for fewer clients. So why would you consider that more relevant?
Yeah, the main reason we believe that untargeted attacks, they want to impact a very large population and an arbitrary set of clients can get affected. And even if the accuracy reduction in the global model is not a lot, it can still impact a very large population of the clients and the clients which are on the head of the distributions. Like the rest of the attacks like backdoors or targeted, they are generally effective on the tail of the distribution, which are very small population. But the untargeted attacks, they can be impactful even at the head of the distribution. And therefore we think that, and head of the distribution is the crux, that's the majority of the population.
I see. A quick follow-up, but for instance, if let's say I am in the head of the distribution and my phone accuracy prediction on the next word is dropped by 5%. If it was close to 100%, would I really be impacted that much by this small 5% drop?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a good question. In theory or in like empirical experiments, I think it may not seem like much, but in production FL, when we have like a very large number of clients and these companies are fighting for 1% accuracy as well, like, so it's a big deal that even a small reduction in accuracy can have large impact for the product. Again.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions for this paper, but please feel free to ask the speaker. Let's thank the speaker one more time.